"You're going to have a baby girl," Milo declared, staring intensely at me with his big blue eyes. "But there will be struggles and pain before she arrives." A hush fell over the living room as all eyes turned towards the 11-year-old boy. My cousin Amanda's face flushed red. "Milo, don't say such things," she scolded, flustered. "I'm so sorry, Bryn. You know how kids can be with their wild imaginations." I forced an awkward smile, trying to diffuse the uncomfortable tension that had settled over our small family gathering. No need to apologize. I'm sure he's just excited at the prospect of having a new little cousin to play with someday. Milo shook his head adamantly. "I'm not making it up, Mom. I saw it clear as day, like I was watching a movie in my mind." An uneasy silence lingered as Amanda searched for the right response. Before she could find the words, little Milo continued. "The baby will be beautiful, Bryn, with dark curls and green eyes, just like you. But there's a fork in the road you'll face. One path is safer, but filled with regrets and what-ifs. The other leads to your daughter, but is treacherous. Obstacles from someone you trusted will try to block your way." My chest tightened as Milo's haunting words washed over me. There was a conviction in his tone that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. For as long as I could remember, he had displayed an unsettling knack for making disturbingly accurate observations well beyond his years. Ever since Alex and I had started trying to have a child over a year ago, I couldn't help but envision our future with a house filled with the joyous sounds of little feet pattering across the floors. Was Milo's eerie prediction giving voice to the dream I had secretly been nurturing, or was this merely an overly fertile child's imagination gone wild? "Honey, you know Grandma gets worried when you say such peculiar things," Amanda said, her voice a frantic whisper as she tried to rein in her son's ramblings. But Milo's gaze remained transfixed on me, utterly undeterred. "You're strong, braver than you know, Bryn. When the dark clouds gather, don't lose your way. The rain will give way to a beautiful rainbow." I felt Alex's comforting hand on my shoulder, pulling me back to the present moment. He leaned in close, his warm breath tickling my ear. "Try not to dwell on it, babe. You know how worked up Milo can get with his overactive mind." Attempting to compose myself, I plastered on a smile and nodded. Yet no matter how fervently I tried to shake off Milo's foreboding words, they clung to me like a burr. A lingering sense of unease took root, leaving me wondering what turbulent road might lie ahead. The ding of the elevator signaled my arrival at the marketing floor where I worked at Harrison and Associates. Stepping out, I immediately spotted Alex huddled with a group of colleagues, going over analytics for an upcoming campaign. He looked up and our eyes met. A warm smile crept across his face, his brown eyes crinkling at the corners in that way that never failed to make my heart skip a beat, even after 7 years of marriage. "There's my gorgeous wife," he called out as I approached. "Don't you all agree Bryn is a total knockout?" A chorus of laughs and agreeable murmurs followed from his coworkers. I felt my cheeks flush slightly at the compliment. "Well, aren't you just a sweet talker today?" I replied, planting a quick peck on his cheek, though I seem to recall someone asking for my mother's famous pecan pie recipe earlier. Alex grinned sheepishly. "You know me too well. I was simply banking future brownie points to cash in later." The evening passed in a blur of prospecting calls, client meetings, and a welcomed break to share lunch together in the company cafeteria. As we chatted about our days, my thoughts inevitably drifted back to Milo's harrowing prediction. "Did I tell you Milo said the most bizarre thing at Amanda's house the other night?" I began, keeping my tone light. Alex nodded slowly, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "About us having a kid? Yeah, I overheard some of it. The little guy has one hell of an imagination, that's for sure." "He was so specific, though," I persisted, unable to shake the niggling feeling that there was more to Milo's words than an overactive fantasy. The details about her looking like me with dark curls and green eyes, and the obstacles we'll apparently face from someone close to us. Alex waved his hand dismissively. "You can't honestly believe any of that nonsense, can you? Milo's a bright kid, but he's got a habit of rambling. You know how kids can get tangled up in their own little make-believe worlds." His reassuring tone sounded sincere enough. And yet, didn't he seem almost defensive? Before I could dwell further, the shrill ring of Alex's cell phone interrupted my thoughts. "It's my mom." he grumbled, not even glancing at the display before declining the call. You know how she is. A missed call is practically a federal crime in Elaine's world. I'll catch up with you in the office, babe. Planting a quick kiss on my cheek, Alex excused himself and stepped into the hallway to return his mother's call. I tried not to read too much into his weary sigh and slight grimace. Truth be told, Elaine was, well, a piece of work was putting it mildly. She meant well, I kept reminding myself. Surely her overbearing, controlling tendencies merely stemmed from her profound love for her family, misguided as they may be. Yet that rationalization rang increasingly hollow lately. Over the years, I couldn't ignore the blatant favoritism she displayed towards Alex's younger brother Dominic, her obvious golden child, and her T727 underhanded comments about how Alex and I were dragging our feet. To start a family certainly didn't help matters. A harsh cackle from outside the cafeteria snapped me back to attention. Peering out, I watched as Alex paced back and forth, the phone cradled against his ear. I'd know the clipped, impatient tone of Elaine's voice anywhere, even from a distance. Though I couldn't make out the words, her willfully oblivious son hung on every chiding utterance as his shoulders sagged lower with each passing second. My heart ached at the dispirited expression he tried and failed to conceal. Yet just as quickly a flicker of resentment ignited within me. Would I ever stop watching that insufferable woman slowly break down the spirit of the man I loved? As if sensing my gaze, Alex glanced up in my direction. Seeing me witness his humiliation, his face flushed crimson. I opened my mouth well, I wasn't quite sure what I intended to convey. Outrage? Reassurance? Sympathy? In that fleeting instant, a profound revelation washed over me. There were deeper currents churning beneath the surface here, far more tumultuous than I could possibly fathom, and they were swiftly sweeping me and my family towards uncharted and potentially perilous waters. The annual Springville Community Fair was in full swing when Alex and I arrived hand in hand that crisp April evening. The scent of funnel cakes and buttered popcorn wafted through the cool air as crowds meandered between rows of game booths and rides. This brings back memories, Alex reminisced with a nostalgic grin, giving my hand an affectionate squeeze. I can still smell the hot dogs my dad used to grill up while we played skee-ball for hours on end. Pretty sure that's just the aroma of the fair's famous behemoth foot-long corn dogs wafting over, I teased. As we strolled along the bustling thoroughfare, I spotted a familiar mane of auburn curls in the distance. Oh, hey, there's your mom over by the ring toss. Alex followed my gaze, his expression clouding briefly before smoothing over into a polite smile. I'll be damned, that is Elaine, being her usual center of attention self. Sure enough, the elegant Elaine Harrison was regaling a small crowd with some dramatic tale, her perfectly manicured hands gesturing animatedly. Even from across the fairgrounds, I could make out the tinkling of her practiced, mirthful laugh. I swear that woman could spin a crocheted potholder into a Tony Award-winning one-woman show, Alex muttered with a rueful shake of his head. Before I could respond, Elaine's gaze settled upon us. Her eyes ignited with an unmistakable glint of recognition, or was it something more akin to predatory relish? "Oh, Alexandra!" she trilled in a saccharine sing-song without preamble. "And if it isn't my daughter-in-law, Bryn, what a fortuitous coincidence." She navigated her way through the dispersing throng with the regal bearing of a debutante. Up close, I couldn't help but marvel at her meticulously groomed appearance, not a single silver hair out of place. "Mom," Alex replied with a curt nod. "Fancy running into you here." Elaine unleashed a theatrical pout. "Is that any way to greet your dear old mother?" Here I thought my beloved only son might spare his doting parent the occasional embrace. Alex shifted his weight uncomfortably, but dutifully complied with a stiff, one-armed hug. Elaine clung a moment longer than necessary, as if savoring her dominance. "You simply must come meet my friends from the Ladies' Historical Society, Bryn dear," she simpered, hooking her arm through mine before I could politely demur. "Why, I was just regaling them with the most delightful anecdote about you and Alexandra when you were mere babes." Unable to extricate myself, I bit the inside of my cheek to stifle the impulse to chuckle derisively at her self-proclaimed delightful anecdotes. They inevitably devolved into backhanded compliments and barbed condescension, thinly veiled as charming banter. "They're enthralled, I'm sure," Alex deadpanned as we trailed behind his domineering mother. "Oh, hush now, you incorrigible cynic. Where are your manners?" Elaine clucked in a lofty, wounded tone over her bony shoulder, although heaven knows I shouldn't remark on what I sought to instill in you at such a tender age. I glanced over at Alex, who merely shrugged in response while massaging his temples, clearly a conditioned reflex developed over years of enduring his mother's digs. I felt the hairs on the nape of my neck prickle as an intrusive thought took root. What if Milo had been right? What if the obstacles he forewarned truly were orchestrated by someone closest to us? Would that manipulative puppet master be none other than the steel magnolia leading us along in her wake like marionettes bound to her strings? For the first time since hearing his chilling prediction, I couldn't completely dismiss Milo's words offhand. Not anymore. Elaine paused in her tracks, swiveling sharply to face us with an inquisitive arch of a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Is something the matter, dears? You both look positively stricken." She tsked lightly while shaking her head in vague disapproval. "Honestly, Alexandra, that brooding petulance might have been a charming look on you when you were a boyhood scamp, but on a grown man it's simply wearying." Alex opened his mouth as if to retort, but then visibly deflated. I watched as the fleeting defiance guttered in his eyes, instantly extinguished. In that moment my throat constricted with a swell of emotions: frustration, sorrow, impotent rage. Yet beneath it all, an iron-willed determination took root. If Milo's vision was indeed a harbinger of the turmoil to come, then I would be ready. Whatever tempestuous destiny awaited on the road ahead, I wouldn't allow Elaine's machinations to steer us off course. Not if I had any say in the matter. The cloying scent of Elaine's overpowering gardenia perfume lingered in the air even after we departed the fairgrounds and arrived back home. I wrinkled my nose in mild disgust at the phantom aroma, just one more layer to peel back in the ever-complexing enigma that was my mother-in-law. Well, that was certainly an experience, Alex sighed, shrugging off his jacket. He hung it over the back of a chair, looking as mentally drained as if he'd just run a marathon. We'd barely been in Elaine's presence for an hour, but her potent dose of toxicity always managed to leave us utterly depleted. "You've got to admit she's a real piece of work," I agreed wryly. "Did you happen to catch what she was whispering to that friend of hers after you excused yourself to take that call?" Alex pinched the bridge of his nose, grimacing. "You mean when she proclaimed in a stage whisper how I was forever disappointing her expectations? Yeah, that's pretty much par for the course with Mother Dearest." "Even for her, that was harsh," I murmured, sliding an arm around his waist. A few beats of silence passed between us. Then, seeming to brace himself, Alex exhaled loudly. "Listen, Bryn, I've been meaning to talk to you about something," he began slowly, averting his gaze as if steeling himself for a thorny conversation. My heart skipped a beat, bracing for bad news over some looming work crisis or other catastrophe. "Mom's been, well, saying some things lately that have got me thinking," he continued, his words gradually gaining momentum. "About us not having kids yet after being married all these years, and I know we've discussed it, but—" "Hold up," I interjected, recoiling slightly. Of all the things I'd braced myself for, I hadn't anticipated this conversational U-turn, much less for him to be parroting Elaine's refrains. "Are you actually taking parenting cues from your mother right now?" Alex held up his hands in a placating gesture. "Hear me out, babe. I'm not looking to pile on the pressure or anything, just maybe she has a point this time?" I arched an incredulous eyebrow. Elaine Harrison had permanently forfeited the benefit of any doubts from me long ago. "All I'm saying is, you can't deny the nonstop hints are starting to carry a ring of truth," Alex pressed on. "My brother's already knocked up wife number 2, with number 3 likely on the way before long. And here we are, hitting our mid-30s with not even the pitter-patter of one set of little feet around the house." An inexplicable lump formed in my throat as I dredged up the recurring ache that had taken root, the one I'd tried my damnedest to stifle over the past couple years. "You think I don't agonize over that every single heartbeat?" I shot back, unable to mask the desperation that had begun creeping into my voice. Month after month of procedures and negative tests and putting on a brave smile for yet another baby shower? Milo's recently prophesied words about our future child reverberated like a thunderclap. I could practically picture her in my mind's eye, just as he'd described. Dark ringlets framing an impish face, emerald eyes brimming with uninhibited joy and curiosity. Alex reached over and squeezed my hand, his expression softening. I hated how naked and vulnerable admitting my innermost yearnings aloud made me feel. As if he could instantly see the repressed hopes and dreams I'd compacted like a tightly wound coil all this time. "I'm not trying to make this into a fight, Bryn. You know I want a baby just as much as you," he soothed in a gentler tone. "And for what it's worth, whatever Mom's warped motivations, she does have a damn good point this time. We can't just keep putting it off forever." I digested this in silence, fidgeting with the fraying end of a throw blanket just to avoid Alex's plaintive gaze. Of course, he was right. There was no sense in denying the growing void any longer. You're right, I conceded softly. A mirthless chuckle escaped my lips. "God, I can't believe I'm actually saying this, but your mother may have inadvertently done us a favor here." One dark brow arched in bemusement. "Come again? We're talking about the same Elaine Harrison here, right?" "Just hear me out," I said, holding up a finger as the first tendrils of revelation began worming their way into my consciousness. What if Elaine's constant needling wasn't just her being a nagging busybody, but something else entirely? Like she subconsciously knew this was one area she didn't have control over. Alex opened his mouth to protest, but I pressed onward, now unable to stop the deluge of epiphanies from tumbling forth. "Don't you see? All this time, we've assumed she was just reflexively sticking her nose where it didn't belong. But what if there was more to it? What if she was provoking us intentionally because she wanted to undermine our growing family before it could even begin?" The crease deepening between Alex's furrowed brows was the only confirmation I needed. In that instant, the wool was lifted from my eyes. Elaine's meddlesome quips had been mercurial little taunts, a campaign of psychological sabotage targeting the closest and most cherished part of her only son's life. My blood turned to ice as a new, unsettling possibility suddenly sprang to mind. Milo's warnings could have been deadly accurate. What if Elaine wasn't just voicing innocuous disapproval, but was actively plotting to thwart our efforts to conceive at every turn? Dear God, what depths had that woman's machinations plumbed? As I watched stunned realization slowly bloom across Alex's face, the dam inside me burst, unleashing a torrent of recriminations bubbling up from the past several years. Every innocuous moment between us, every perceived slight from Elaine, every prior assumption was shattered and recontextualized into something infinitely more sinister. This was no mere clash between overzealous mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. It was all part of a calculated power play waged against the happiness of my own family. I can't believe she'd go that far," Alex stammered, his voice hoarse and constricted as the weight of the appalling realization hit him. "My God, Bryn, what the hell has she been up to behind our backs?" My jaw clenched as determination surged through me like an electric current. If Elaine thought she'd slink back into the shadows after stirring this nest of vipers, she had another thing coming. One way or another, I would uncover the truth. No matter how dark the revelations, how damning the evidence, come hell or high water, I would drag every last one of her secrets into the light. Steeling myself, I met Alex's stricken gaze with grim resolution. "I don't know," I stated with more calm than I felt, "but I'm sure as hell going to find out. No more lies, no more tricks. It all ends now." I felt a jagged anticipation swirling within, not unlike a cornered animal sensing a predator's approach. Elaine had vastly underestimated how far I was willing to go to protect my family. Mother-in-law or not, it was past time I turned the tables on her poisonous games. After all, karma wasn't always a merciful mistress, as she was about to discover firsthand. I spent the next several days sifting through a disjointed trail of breadcrumbs and half-remembered inconsistencies from the past, determined to piece together the full extent of Elaine's misdeeds. The more I unearthed, the more nauseated I became at the sheer depths of her duplicity. Heated discussions with Alex yielded recollections of misplaced medical files from his OB/GYN office and Elaine's repeated insistence on joining us for every fertility clinic appointment in spite of our protestations. Offhand remarks she made about the side effects of my prescribed medications began to take on more disturbing connotations. It was during a late-night Google binge that the final, damning pieces clicked into place. I sat bolt upright in bed, my heart pounding as I absorbed the information on the overview for Hypomatic, a medication primarily used to treat polycystic ovarian syndrome, but also routinely prescribed for infertility issues. Elaine had slipped it into her own casual references several times, randomly bringing up the drug's purported side effects of fatigue, nausea, and severe disruptions to a woman's menstrual cycle. My blood turned to ice as I recalled the protracted stretches of debilitating cramps and unpredictable spotting of the past few years, issues my OBGYN had repeatedly chalked up to stress or hormonal imbalances. All this time, we'd been inadvertently poisoning my chances of conceiving, but not by mistake, by insidious, premeditated design. "Alex," I hissed, shoving his slumbering form, "wake up, this is serious." 2 weeks later, I stared grimly at the faces of my assembled family and in-laws, mentally bracing myself for what was to come. Elaine primped and fretted over her doting audience as usual, clueless to the reckoning that awaited. I caught her mid-flow, skewering her with an unwavering look. "Elaine!" Her theatrical prattling cut off as abruptly as a record scratching. Surprise flickered across her features. "Why, Bryn?" she tittered, pasting on a look of sugary faux innocence. "What an unexpected interruption. You're being terribly rude, dear." I felt Alex shift his stance beside me, a tectonic plate preparing to unleash its fury. "Rude?" I echoed softly, my tone dangerously level. "You want to lecture me on rude?" Her mask faltered just a bit, revealed a glimmer of reptilian blankness. I seized on it like a falcon spotting its prey's vulnerability. "When did it start, Elaine?" I demanded, determined not to let her wrest back control of the conversation. "A year ago? 5? Or did your pathological mania to undermine Alex's happiness start even before we were married?" A spattering of tense murmurs, shuffling feet. She cast an imperious glance around the room. Any other time, those present would have folded like a circus tent beneath her withering stare. Today, however, her usual sycophants merely exchanged wary, sidelong looks, feeding off the undercurrents of tension. I didn't give her an opportunity to regain her bearings. "You've spent years sabotaging every attempt we made to start a family," I declared, raising my chin in grim defiance. "Switched medications, planted self-doubt, forged medical records. Am I even scratching the surface?" The atmosphere was charged with stunned silence. It was as if I'd let the air out of the proverbial room with an icy exhale. My eyes bored into Elaine's, unblinking. I wasn't a woman prone to histrionics or shallow appeals for sympathy, but the circus master before me had pushed beyond any reasonable boundaries. It was time to reveal the viper lurking behind the curtain, teeth and all. "Well?" I challenged, my words slicing through the vacuum as I unleashed the full brunt of my fury. "What's your excuse, Elaine? I hope it's more compelling than envy or some twisted need to control your son." "How dare you?" Her voice emerged laced with a venom as potent as her actions, dripping with a quiet rage that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. But I refused to shrink before the sputtering forge of her indignant ire. It was her turn to cower beneath my glare's menacing weight. "You sanctimonious little Mother!" A thick, furious bellow rent the air. It was Alex, his face a twisted mask of betrayal and incandescent rage. My normally mild-mannered husband was unrecognizable, every tightly coiled wire wound from years of abuse snapping in a blinding instant. "I cannot fathom the level of abject evil it took to do something like this to your own family," he growled in a voice even lower and more terrifying than his outburst. "To your own blood." Elaine's jaw worked furiously, struggling to formulate a response. For one fleeting instant, I caught a glimpse of the naked fear in her eyes. Good, I thought in a moment of callous savagery. Let her seize in terror over the fire she'd willfully stoked. How I wish I could savor that momentary flicker of weakness longer, but a whiplash of movement and sound drew my eyes away. Just as Dominic lunged to his feet, his arms rigid at his sides as his body went ramrod straight. I followed his burning, accusatory gaze over to where Elaine stiffened, caught in the crossfire. It dawned on me then with dawning certitude and horror. The oblivious golden child knew nothing of his mother's twisted machinations, until now. The tableau before us crystallized into a grotesque artifice, a brittle dollhouse facade concealing a nest of vipers far deadlier than we'd imagined. Yet even amid the carnage lay a tragic figure, a perpetually favored son opening his eyes for the first time to the rot lurking within his clan's foundation. I opened my mouth, but no sound emerged. What remained to be said? The damage had been wrought, the reckoning delivered. The shattered shards of our once idyllic existence lay strewn at our feet like a broken mirror. There was no piecing anything back together. Not after this. In the suffocating silence that blanketed the room, you could have heard a pin drop. Elaine remained rooted in place, her chin jutting out in a defiant tilt as she dared us with those reptilian eyes to make the next move. Alex and I steeled ourselves, squaring our shoulders as if bracing for an imminent attack. It was Dominic who finally broke the spell, shattering the fragile stalemate with a choked utterance. "Mom?" The plaintiveness in his tone sliced through me, conjuring an image of a frightened child pleading for reassurance from the monsters under his bed. My heart twisted in sorrow and impotent anger over the innocence that monster had shattered for us all. Elaine pivoted on her heel to face her youngest, her eyebrows arched in a look of haughty innocence that would have been convincing if not for the smear of panic telegraphed in her strained features. "Well, don't just gawk at me like one of your insipid beta fish, Dominic," she snapped with a derisive wave of her hand. "Your sister-in-law is clearly deranged if she thinks." "Don't," Dominic interrupted, his voice hardening to a tone I'd never heard from the normally affable man. "I beg your pardon?" Elaine sputtered, aghast at the unaccustomed insolence from her favored golden child. Dominic swallowed hard, seeming to steady himself with a deep breath. When his gaze alighted on his mother once more, it smoldered with a quiet fury. "Don't insult me by denying it outright," he said in a voice as taut as a tripwire, "or try deflecting with empty insults about Bryn and Alex's imagined mental state." He took a halting step forward, each footfall like the weight of an immense burden being lowered onto his shoulders. "Not after hearing that horrific revelation with my own 2 ears." Elaine issued a soft cluck of disapproval, patting his cheek in an almost maternal gesture, utterly at odds with the circumstances. "Oh, pish, you're working yourself into such an unnecessary state over some baseless accusations." "Enough!" Dominic bellowed with such abrupt ferocity that even I flinched. Elaine recoiled, shrinking back a few paces from this heretofore unseen side of her offspring. "My God," he muttered, raking a shaky hand through his hair. "I don't even know who you are anymore, if I ever really did. What kind of twisted, unforgivable thing did you do?" His mother seemed to wilt further and further with each lash of his furious denunciations. She shook her head almost plaintively, as if desperately beseeching him to somehow understand. I'd witnessed enough toxic dissolution of family dynamics to recognize the dispiriting signs. Suspicion calcifying into immovable factions, once unshakable allegiances fracturing under the weight of ugly revelations. My jaw clenched as memories of my own parents' acrimonious divorce came rushing back like a surging tide. The writing was on the wall, spelling an all-too-familiar and heart-rending endgame that had unfolded again and again throughout my lifetime. The disintegration of what had once been a family unit into splintered shards. One wounded soul cowering under the tearful accusation of his betrayer's own offspring. Another puffing up in impotent rage at having his hypocrisy shattered beyond any hope of reconstruction. There were simply no winners to be had in such minefields. Only depleted souls sifting through the rubble, desperate for a path out of their fractured reality. Then Alex shifted his stance slightly beside me, and my gaze instinctively followed suit. What I saw in his eyes stopped me cold. A piercing look of singular determination, glinting like a naked blade being unsheathed. Gone was the wounded filial heartbreak over yet another of his mother's callous deceptions. In its place smoldered the stoic resolve of a man implacably set on a harsh course, whatever heroic defiance or scorched earth lay in his path. Not for the first time, I marveled at the depth of steely backbone that my husband possessed when finally roused from complacency. Few had the privilege of witnessing this side of Alex, but those who did knew to stand well clear of the blast radius. He caught me staring and responded with an infinitesimal shake of his head, so slight as to be imperceptible to the others. Those eyes locked onto mine pointedly, silently conveying a message of unspoken solidarity. This ends now. No more games, no more retreats. And as I searched his unyielding countenance for any vestige of weakness or ambivalence, a new emotion welled up from my core, a grim sense of vengeful duty spreading like an ink blot over my heart. He was right. In that instant, I knew there was no redemption left to be salvaged, no shattered remnants worth preserving. Everything had been irrevocably shattered. The path forward led through an inescapable point of no return. Our family's sole path to justice lay in that scorched earth stretched before us like a gauntlet, beckoning with the promise of a peace that could only be bought with retribution. No matter what merciless destiny awaited us there, one thing was certain. Elaine Harrison's days of treacherous machinations against her own blood were officially over. One way or another, this generational saga of lies and betrayal would end with us. Come what may, karma would finally be delivered its due. The days following our cataclysmic family confrontation passed in a blur. Elaine shored up what tattered defenses remained, alternating between feigning indignant outrage over our baseless allegations and meek supplications begging for reconciliation. Alex and I were having none of it. We'd glimpsed the noxious truth festering at his family's core, and there was no dispelling that miasma through appeasement or half measures. Dominic had fallen into a brooding silence in the aftermath, lost in the disorienting realization that the idyllic childhood he'd known had been an artifice erected on lies and betrayal. I ached for him, recalling how it felt to have the naive blinders ripped away from my own eyes during my parents' divorce. For his part, Alex had slipped into what I'd coined his thermal exhaust port mode, cool, taciturn, and entirely focused on systematically dismantling the adversary piece by piece. It was unnervingly at odds with the laid-back charmer I'd fallen for. But in these circumstances, I couldn't deny a fierce sense of gratitude for this ruthless new side of him. When he informed me of his meticulously mapped stratagem, I shuddered, not at the calculated zealotry, but from the glacial understanding that animated it. We were well and truly past the point of civilized recourse with Elaine. The time for polite niceties had expired. The first salvo came 4 days after the fracturing, as I'd begun calling it. Alex invited Elaine to a cleared-the-air lunch, ostensibly to give her a chance at a truthful explanation for her appalling actions. Like a moth drawn to a flame, she readily accepted, clearly self-deluded enough to believe she could slither her way out of judgment through artful obfuscations and crocodile tears. Upon her arrival, she was ushered not to a private dining room as expected, but through a service corridor leading to a sealed conference room. There, assembled around a long table, sat a grim-faced tribunal. Alex, Dominic, and 6 other individuals whose stern visages I recognized from the various legal filings accumulated over the past several weeks of clandestine preparation. Elaine faltered, a flash of stunned unease momentarily shattering her poise before the courtly mask was repositioned. "What is the meaning of this unseemly gathering?" "Have a seat, Elaine," Alex stated flatly, gesturing towards a lone chair positioned before the panel. She bristled, drawing herself up in affronted hauteur. "I will do no such thing until someone—" "Mother?" Dominic's rumbled rebuke stopped her cold. He regarded her with undisguised umbrage, as if staring at something distasteful stuck to the bottom of his shoe. My heart clenched painfully at the depth of his barely restrained contempt. This time Elaine's mask slipped entirely, if only for an instant. The naked hurt and bewilderment etched across her features would have seemed pitiful if I didn't recognize it for what it truly was. The desperate lashing out of an inveterate manipulator being cut off from her supply lines. "Dominic," she croaked, reaching out a placating hand. "Surely you can't." "Just sit down, please," he ground out, unable to even maintain eye contact any longer. Something inside her seemed to wilt as the weight of her awful solitude finally registered. Sinking into the proffered chair, she cast a wary, wounded look around the assembled officiants, then finally settled on Alex's thunderous countenance with pleading resignation. I tensed at his answering look of harsh finality, gripping the edge of the table with white knuckles. For all the unforgivable slights and crushed hopes, there was no prepared salve to ease the pain of the impending denouement. just a scalpel to excise the gangrenous limb poisoning our family once and for all. But we had come too far for last-second cold feet. Taking a steadying breath, he withdrew a thick manila folder containing what had to be hundreds of pages of documentation from across the table. "You are being presented today with the full body of evidence detailing a years-long conspiracy to undermine your own family," he intoned in a tone of such solemn gravity it was as if rendering a judge's verdict rather than merely addressing his mother. "Forgeries, defamations, willful obfuscation bordering on felonious acts against my wife and I," he continued, each word seemingly to strike Elaine with the weight of a sledgehammer blow, "all in order to sabotage our efforts to conceive a child and secure your twisted control over this family and its bloodline." The proclamations kept coming, an inexorable avalanche of accusations, each infinitely more damning than the last, all couched in a meticulously cultivated portfolio of proof. And most damningly, each one was enumerated not just by Alex, but affirmed by a cadre of expert witnesses delineating chapter and verse of her elaborate offenses under oath. How I had underestimated his preparation, his ability to surgically dismantle her nefarious agenda through the path of maximum pain. The barrage was as merciless as it was inescapable, laying bare the wretched truth in all its lurid monstrosity. Elaine's villainy had metastasized into a cancer that would take down the entire family structure. And now, the scourge was being savagely exorcised through its only course of treatment, absolute admission and recompense. There would be no more obfuscation, no more evasive parlor tricks or hollow deniability. Only the unvarnished truth and its inexorable consequences. "Do you understand the depth of what you've done?" Alex's voice lashed out as the final witness's proclamation hung in the air like a death knell. Elaine sat slumped, vacant and deflated, like a collapsed marionette whose strings had all been severed. Her haunted gaze flicked up, registering my face fleetingly before drifting back to Alex's accusatory glare. How could you do this to your own mother?" she rasped in a voice parched of all pretense. I expected Alex to spit out a contemptuous rebuttal reminding her of the sins that had precipitated this occasion, but instead he merely exhaled through his nose with a sort of weary resignation. "I'm not doing anything," he said with a chilling finality that seemed to splinter whatever remained of Elaine's bluster into powder. "This is simply karma's hand finally being dealt." Then, in front of God and the assembled witnesses, Elaine Harrison, once imperious matriarch and merciless puppeteer of our family's fate, crumbled into silent, bitter weeping. And for all the satisfaction I'd imagined would accompany such a cathartic comeuppance, I felt nothing but a hollow, gaping sadness. Our vendetta had been achieved, yet at what terrible cost. Autumn's crisp breezes carried the bittersweet aroma of decaying leaves that fateful afternoon, an olfactory harbinger of change and renewal threading through the twilight air. Sometimes the simplest moments trigger the most profound revelations. For me, it happened as I cradled Mila in my arms, entranced by her cherubic features while she slumbered peacefully against my chest. The rhythmic rise and fall of her tiny back lulled me into a trance-like reverie punctuated only by the occasional bird-song from the backyard. I stroked the downy wisps of sable hair crowning her head, so dark and unruly, already mirroring my own unmanageable mane. A faint smile tugged at my lips as I committed every facet of her appearance to memory. Her rosebud lips, the faint dusting of freckles stippled across her elfin nose, even the little crease that furrowed between her eyebrows whenever she fussed. Most of all, those long-lashed eyes that had captivated me the instant they'd opened to gaze up at me in the delivery room. Not a muddy hazel like her father, but rather a striking peridot, the color of new spring grass. I tensed reflexively as a lock suddenly clicked downstairs. All it took was the faintest rustling from the hall to rouse Mila from her slumber, prompting a sleepy gurgle and soft coo. Within seconds, Alex's looming shadow materialized in the nursery's doorway, his face melting into a beatific grin. "Hey there, Munchkin." He crossed to us in 2 strides, bending to drop a tender kiss to Mila's crown. "Keeping your mama company while she holds down the fort? And what adventures did you get up to out in the big wide world today?" I teased, tipping my chin up to accept his lingering kiss. As he drew back, I couldn't help but bask in the glow of adoration warming his eyes. That same enamored look that never failed to reduce me to a giddy puddle even now, almost 9 years into our marriage. "Nothing too exciting," he murmured, settling onto the armchair beside us, while casually unbuttoning his collar. A soft chuckle rumbled in his chest as Mila instinctively swiveled her head towards the sound of his voice, already enthralled. "Just the usual media sales pitches and schmoozing clients over catered lunches," Alex continued with a wink in my direction. "But enough about me. This little peanut is clearly the star of the show today." He cocked his head to regard Mila's saucer-like gaze trained upon him. "You been behaving yourself for Mommy while I was away, Shortcake?" I chuckled mirthfully at his sing-song tone, the very picture of a besotted new father delighting in his offspring. When Mila's tiny hand emerged from beneath her swaddle to bat playfully at his face, Alex sputtered with unbridled elation. "Oh, I see how it is, Missy. Trying to rough up your old man right from the outset, huh?" We relished in Mila's ensuing giggles, joyous peals of laughter ringing out like silver bells in the peaceful hush of the nursery. In that instant, it was as if all the heartache and torment of the preceding years had been banished to a distant, cobwebbed recess, lost amid the simple rapture of being present with those dearest to you. As Mila's laughs subsided into intermittent coos, I caught Alex's eyes flitting towards the antique crib positioned in the corner. My breath caught for a moment as I followed his gaze, taking in the hand-carved detailing depicting leaping gazelles and swooping birds mid-flight. It was the same crib Alex's father had painstakingly restored and gifted to us. How many times had Alex run his fingers over those grooves, channeling his grief over whether we'd ever get the chance to use it for its intended purpose? Too many to count. In retrospect, our soaring hopes crushed again and again by one insidious force. As if in tune with my introspective turn, Alex's face grew solemn. Something indiscernible flickered behind his eyes before vanishing just as quickly. He rested his palm over my knee, giving it an affectionate squeeze. "Hard to believe it was less than a year ago that all the drama went down," he murmured in a hushed tone, as if not to disturb Mila's attention. My mind immediately jolted back to that fateful day in the conference room. Elaine's utter debasement as every scheme and conspiracy became an ineradicable part of the permanent record, carved into stone through testimony and documentation. How her papery, thin veneer of genteel grace and propriety had disintegrated under the weight of her wrongdoings being laid bare for all to witness. I swallowed thickly against the sudden lump in my throat. I'll never forget the look on her face that day, like the mask had finally shattered beyond any hope of repair. Alex's features tightened into a pained grimace I knew all too well, the echoes of a complicated, still unresolved relationship with his mother that seemed destined to haunt him for years to come. There were simply too many emotional fault lines fractured that day for any of us to achieve total closure. I did what needed to be done, for us and for the family, that he stated in a low, resolute tone that betrayed only the faintest quaver of lingering uncertainty. Still, I can't help but wonder if I was too heavy-handed. My free hand instinctively found his, our fingers interlacing. There would be no easy balm to heal those old emotional gouges, not entirely. But perhaps with time, and the all-consuming joy radiating out of our long-awaited miracle nestled between us, we could begin to rebuild anew on firmer ground. "You protected us and our future, Alex, against any threat, no matter how twisted or dark," I said, offering a reassuring squeeze. "That's all a good father ever needs to do." His grateful smile in response was enough to fill my heart to overflowing. Then Mila cooed softly again, drawing our rapt attention back to her cherubic mug like twin sunflowers turning towards the light. As I relished the sight of my beautiful daughter radiating undiluted joy and innocence, Milo's uncanny words from all those months ago reverberated in my mind's eye like a mantra, of triumph emerging from devastation, of light piercing the void. A daughter whose existence had only manifested through hard-won recompense for the very blackest betrayal. The living, breathing embodiment of karma's unbowed perseverance and the remarkable power of human resilience against even the most implacable darkness. No matter what convulsions had rocked our family's foundations to their core, in this tranquil moment of joy and renewal, we had prevailed. Scars would remain, of course, for all our catharsis, The past could never be truly expunged. But here at last was our chance to forge ahead anew. One single wondrous life offered up an opportunity, not just for a fresh chapter, but as the first radiant strains of an entirely new family saga, all thanks to that most delicate yet undaunted of human virtues, hope.
I took a seat on the worn-out, ancient couch, which had formerly been a source of amusement and late-night viewings. It served just as a memento of a simpler, more joyous era in the past. The weight of the past was thick on the room surrounding me. My 4-year-old daughter, Anna, was sound asleep upstairs, her soft breathing a sharp contrast to the tense atmosphere that had descended upon our house. When I looked at the clock, it was already after 11:00 p.m. Charles was running late again, as was his custom. The stillness was eventually broken by the sound of the key turning in the lock. I straightened up, not sure why I still bothered, but out of habit I smoothed down my shirt. I quietly cried out, "Charles," as he entered, appearing to be a stranger rather than the person I had known. "You're late." He crumbled without looking at me. "Work." His voice seemed chilly and distant today, after earlier being warm and kind. I made an effort to seem casual, but a knot started to form in my chest. Today, Anna had inquired about you. She was curious as to when her father would return home. He casually hung his coat on the hanger after shrugging it off. Children have many questions. That does not imply that we always know the solutions. His lack of concern hurt. The knot in my throat was swallowed. Maybe this weekend, the three of us could do something. That would be adored by Anna. Charles sneered, contempt seeping from his voice. A trip with the family? With all that's happening? Betty, don't be so innocent. As I talked, my hands quivered a little, as if I was struggling to hang on to the discussion. Charles, I was not married to this person. It's crucial, Charles. Her father is necessary to her. Without even glancing at me, he strolled to the refrigerator and took out a bottle. What she needs is a miracle, not me pretending to be a happy family of the park. Tears began to fill up in my eyes. "Charles, she's your daughter. How come you're so chilly?" He drank deeply from the bottle, his eyes concentrated on everything but me. "Betty, I'm being practical. A sick child in a home that feels more like a hospital. This isn't the life I wanted." Emotion rising in my voice, I followed him into the kitchen. "How about me? Do you really think I like to see our daughter suffer? Do you believe I'm living the life I've always wanted?" The sound of Charles slamming the beer bottle against the counter reverberated through the strained quiet. Honestly, Betty, I have no idea. But I'm aware that I'm out of luck. I was filled with rage. You ought to walk away from your child. In one swallow, he drained the last of his drink. I require room. This is too much suffocating for me. Suffocation? I echoed, shocked. Is that what your family is to you now? He looked aside, tensed in his shoulders. Betty's, it goes beyond that. Everything is centered around Anna's illness, including the many trips to the hospital, the debts she incurs, and everything else. This is not what I signed up for. I was stunned and just gazed at him. How could this harsh truth have become our love? "So, Charles, what are your plans? Go from us? Go somewhere else and start over?" He merely went by me, his footsteps heavy on the hardwood floor, without answering. I stood there feeling angry, heartbroken, and deeply betrayed. A storm of emotions was building inside of me. Charles's TV was making a faint sound from the other room as I laid in bed later that night, the space next to me chilly and empty. Our gap had been too big for us to overcome, and I couldn't help but worry whether it would ever be able to. The guy I had married, the father of my kid, had once seemed warm and familiar, but now he seemed like a stranger living with me. Our house, usually a warm and cozy place, was a far cry from the antiseptic hospital room where our daughter Anna lay on a little bed, her little chest rising and falling rhythmically. I sat by her side and clutched her little hand, taking comfort in her quiet sleep. With a professional and pleasant expression on her face, Nurse Sharon entered the room. "How's our brave girl doing today, Betty?" she said. I forced a tired grin. She's a fighter, always has been. Sharon moved quickly and gently to check Anna's vitals. Here, she is in capable hands. She gave me assurance that the surgical staff is among the finest. I nodded, a knot in my throat from concerns I was unable to express. I am aware. All I want is for Charles to be here more. She is requesting him nonstop. Sharon shot me a pitying glance. Fathers often find it hard to cope with these situations, but you're doing an amazing job. Loneliness weighed heavily on me. You know, it's challenging to do it alone. Simply put, he is changed. Charles appeared as though he was meant to, and his presence was not as consoling as I had imagined. His expression was impenetrable as he looked at me and then at Anna. "How is she?" "The same," I said, attempting to maintain my composure. He avoided making eye contact as he fiddled with his phone. "I have to go soon. Work is insane." I felt a sudden burst of rage. Work, right, because that's what's important right now. Charles raised his head, his eyes icy. "Betty, what do you want from me? To observe her sleep from here?" I swallowed a backhanded remark and kept my eyes on Anna. "Charles, she asked for you today. Her father is missing." He shrugged, his detachment forming a tangible barrier between us. "I'm here, aren't I?" Before I could respond, Anna stirred, her voice weak but clear. "Daddy?" Charles's face softened momentarily as he moved closer to her. "Hey, princess. Daddy's here." Anna smiled faintly, reaching out to him. "Stay with me, Daddy." The mix of hope and sorrow in my heart grew as Charles hesitated and then sat on the edge of the bed. "I can't stay long, Anna. Daddy has to work." Her smile faded, an understanding far beyond her years in her eyes. "It's okay, Daddy. I love you." Charles forced a smile, patting her hand. "I love you too, kiddo." As he stood to leave, I felt a surge of resentment. "She needs you, Charles. We need you." He paused, his back to us. "I'm doing what I can, Betty," but his words rang hollow in the sterile room. I watched him leave, a familiar sense of abandonment settling over me. Anna's hand gripped mine, her small presence a reminder of the fight ahead of us. The room fell silent again, save for the beeping of the monitors. I leaned closer to Anna, whispering promises of better days. Promises I wasn't sure I could keep. But in that moment, all I had was hope and the unwavering love for my daughter. The silence was broken by a call from my friend Marilyn, a local realtor. I sat in the dimly lit hospital cafeteria, clutching a lukewarm cup of coffee, my mind a whirlwind of betrayal and shock. Marilyn slid into the seat across from me, her expression a mix of concern and urgency. "Charles is selling our house, our home," she said. Anger and disbelief swirled within me, fueling a determination I hadn't felt in months. Under the dim lights of the hospital cafeteria, Marilyn, my longtime friend and a dedicated realtor, revealed the shocking news that shook me to the core. "Betty, I can't believe he's going this far, selling your house while you're anchored here with Anna." I inhaled sharply, my hands quivering as I struggled to calm myself. "Marilyn, please try to delay the sale. I need some time to figure this out." Her expression hardened with determination. "I'll do everything I can, Betty, but you need to know he's insisting on closing the sale quickly." I leaned in, my voice steady with newfound resolve. "He won't succeed without a fight. He thinks he can just erase our lives, start anew with her. Marilyn squeezed my hand in solidarity. What's your plan, Betty? The word plan echoed in my head, igniting a fire within me. For too long, I'd been passive, a spectator in my own life, overshadowed by Charles's growing indifference. No more. I'm taking a stand, I declared. First thing tomorrow, I'm meeting with a lawyer. We'll find a way to halt the sale. Encouragement lit up Marilyn's face. That's the spirit. Fight for what's yours, Betty. I'm with you every step. I nodded, my spirit bolstered by her support. I'll also need solid evidence, proof of his duplicity, any fraudulent dealings, anything that will strengthen our case. We'll start with scrutinizing the sale details, Marilyn proposed. I'll gather all the information I can on the buyer and any irregularities in the deal. I took a bitter sip of my coffee, its harshness mirroring the turmoil inside me. After all we've been through, I can't believe he's capable of this, to Anna, to me. Marilyn's hand tightened around mine, her voice filled with resolve. He's a coward for underestimating your strength, Betty, and he'll soon realize his mistake. Rising from our seats, my determination solidified. He'll regret this, Marilyn. He'll regret harming Anna and trying to steal our home. I'll see to that. Marilyn stood by me, fierce and unwavering. Let's turn the tables on him, Betty. Let's show him he messed with the wrong woman. Concealed just outside the realtor's office, my heart raced as I eavesdropped on the meeting inside. Charles was there, smooth-talking the potential buyers with his usual charisma. His mistress's laughter echoed, carefree and unaware of the storm she was part of. I observed as Charles confidently presented the paperwork. This house is a gem, an absolute steal at this price, he boasted. The interested couple, eager yet cautious, nodded as they perused the documents. Everything appears to be in order, the wife commented. Charles's mistress, decked in vibrant red lipstick, chuckled, leaning in close. See, easy as pie, she murmured audibly. My anger flared, but I remained focused on the task at hand. This was about gathering damning evidence. The husband glanced up inquiringly. And the owner is on board with all this. Charles' reply came swiftly, a lie so effortless it seemed almost truthful. Absolutely. She's ready to move on, eager to sell quickly. My fist clenched at his blatant falsehood, my nails digging into my palms as I resisted the urge to storm in. Marilyn, ever the ally in my scheme, smoothly interjected. If you're ready, we can finalize this sale right now. The couple exchanged a glance and nodded. We can't pass this up. I watched in silent agony as they signed the documents, each stroke a strike against the life we had built. I remained stoic, aware that this was a moment for clear-headed action, not unchecked emotions. Charles's laughter echoed in the background, mingling with the clinking of glasses as he toasted to new beginnings with the buyers, his arm around his mistress. My entrance into the room was sudden, causing a ripple of shock and confusion among the guests. Enjoying yourself, Charles? My voice was calm, my presence bringing the celebration to an abrupt pause. His smile faltered. Betty, what are you doing here? His question hung in the air as I approached them with determined steps. I'm here to stop you from making a monumental mistake, I stated firmly. His mistress rolled her eyes dismissively. What are you talking about? The deal is done. I returned a smile, cold and devoid of any friendliness. Is it now? Because I don't recall agreeing to sell my house. The buyers exchanged uneasy glances. We were told everything was in order. The husband spoke, his voice laced with doubt. Charles attempted to regain control of the situation, stepping forward. Betty, you're confused. This is for the best. I shook my head, resolute. No, Charles, the only confusion here is yours if you think you can forge my signature and get away with it. Silence enveloped the room. Charles's complexion turned notably paler. You can't prove anything, he blurted defensively. From my bag, I produced a set of documents. Actually, I can, and I have. These are the real papers. What you have are forgeries. His mistress tugged at his arm, panic edging her voice. Charles, what's she talking about? Tell me this isn't true. But Charles was speechless, his usual suave demeanor shattered. At that moment, the door swung open, and 3 police officers entered. One of them addressed Charles directly. Charles Johnson, you're under arrest for fraud and forgery. The color drained from his face as he looked at me, disbelief etching his features. You called the cops. Yes, I did. I replied, my voice steady and unwavering. You broke the law, Charles, and you tried to steal my home. As the officers handcuffed him, his mistress began to sob, her makeup running. The buyers, sensing the gravity of the situation, quickly gathered their belongings, eager to remove themselves from the unfolding drama. One officer turned to me. We need your statement, ma'am. I nodded, feeling a surge of vindication. Of course, officer. As they led Charles away, he threw a glance back at me, a mix of anger and regret in his eyes. But I felt no sympathy for him. He had made his choice, and now he was facing the consequences. Marilyn, witnessing the scene, smiled at me approvingly. I returned the smile and exited the office, feeling a significant burden lift from my shoulders. I had stood up for myself and for Anna. This was just the beginning. After Charles's arrest, I found myself in the lawyer's office, surrounded by law books and the heavy scent of leather. Mr. Ronald, my attorney, was a no-nonsense man in his 50s. His face marked with lines of experience. He reviewed the file before him. Betty, your husband's actions have opened up a significant can of worms. The fraud charge is serious. I sat across from him, my hands clasped tightly. I know, Mr. Ronald, but I couldn't let him get away with it. Not after everything. He nodded, understanding in his gaze. I respect that. Now about the divorce and custody battle. You're in a strong position, but it won't be easy. I leaned forward, resolute. I'm ready for it. I have to do this for Anna. She deserves a stable home. He shuffled some papers. What about alimony and child support? Given Charles' likely incarceration, it's going to be complicated. I sighed, a mix of determination and sadness coloring my voice. The road ahead was daunting, but I was prepared to navigate it for the sake of my daughter. Anna is my top concern, and I only want what's best for her. As for Charles, he made his own decisions. Mr. Ronald gave me a firm look, his face etched with seriousness. Betty, you're a resilient woman. We'll ensure you and your daughter get the justice you deserve. Leaving his office, my phone rang. It was Charles. I hesitated but answered. What do you want, Charles? His voice, filled with urgency, reached me. Betty, I know I've made mistakes, but please don't keep Anna away from me. I stopped walking, anger building inside. Were you thinking of Anna when you tried to sell our house? When you were spending your days with someone else? He was silent. I lost my way, Betty, but I'm still her dad. I love her. Holding my phone tighter, I replied, love is more than just words, Charles. It's shown through actions. You've let us both down. His voice broke. I'll do anything to fix this. Please. I shook my head, even though he couldn't see. It's too late for that. You can see Anna, but only with supervised visits. That's final. He paused, then quietly accepted. The following days were a whirlwind. I spent most of my time making sure Anna felt loved and stable amid the turmoil. Her laughter soothed my broken heart. One afternoon, while Anna napped, Julie, my sister, called. "Hey, Betty, how are you coping?" Her voice always carried a blend of concern and strength. "I'm managing, Julie. It's tough, but I'm hanging in there." Julie was quiet for a moment. "I heard about Charles. I'm sorry, Betty, but I'm proud of you for standing your ground." I smiled weakly. "Thanks, Julie. It's hard, but Anna needs me now more than ever." Her tone softened. "And who's there for you, Betty?" Her question took me by surprise. Caught up in caring for Anna and the legal battle, I hadn't really considered my own needs. "I don't know, Julie. I haven't had the chance to think about myself." Julie's reply was firm. "You need to look after yourself, too. You can't pour from an empty cup." She was right. "I'll try, Julie. It's just all so overwhelming." You're not alone. Remember that. I'm here for you, always. The next day, I visited a therapist, Dr. Scott. His office was a welcoming space with gentle lighting and a comfy couch. He greeted me with a warm smile. "Betty, it's good to meet you. How can I help you today?" I took a deep breath and shared my worries and fears. "I just feel so lost, Dr. Scott. Everything I trusted has turned upside down." Dr. Scott nodded, his voice soft and understanding. "It's natural to feel this way after what you've experienced. It's essential to recognize that challenging times are just one chapter in the extensive narrative of your life, not the entirety of it." This notion struck a chord with me and sparked a period of gradual but meaningful changes as I began to rebuild my life. I found solidarity in a support group for single parents. Despite the initial nervousness of my first meeting, the sense of community was palpable as others shared their experiences. It was a relief to know I wasn't alone. The group leader welcomed me warmly, encouraging us to support and uplift each other. I shared my own experiences with the group. As I spoke, my voice was steady yet charged with emotion. The group members offered me looks of empathy and understanding. Afterward, Abigail, one of the group members, came over to speak with me. "Your story is inspiring, Betty. You're stronger than you realize," she said. Her words buoyed my spirits, and I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could transform this challenging chapter into a tale of resilience and hope. I sat in the quiet of an early morning at home, thinking back on the turbulent path that had led me to this peaceful moment. The divorce was legally concluded. Perched on my coffee table, the documents signified a fresh phase of self-reliance. The court case had been exhausting. For our daughter Anna's steady future, I had battled my ex-husband Charles for a just portion of his assets. Charles was found guilty of fraud and had to deal with the repercussions of the court's decision in our favor. His accomplice, who had been duped by them, also received a harsh legal punishment. It was strange to watch Charles and his accomplice pointing fingers at one another. There was just blame, not regret. There was a bright spot, nevertheless, in spite of the confusion caused by the court cases and mental anguish. After her operation, Anna was back to her vivacious laughing, which filled our house with a warmth that had been missing for far too long. I thought about our future as I sipped my morning coffee, a future I had battled so hard for, and that now appeared bright and promising. My first focus and ray of hope was Anna. We had weathered a storm even more powerful than the last. I glanced at the pictures on the mantel. They showed us at the park, at the zoo, grinning broadly. These were more than simply pictures. They were representations of our resiliency and ability to have joy in the face of hardship. Anna suddenly raced into the room, her eyes gleaming with joy and her hair ruffled. She said excitedly, "Mommy, are we going to the park today?" I nodded, love brimming in my heart. Yes, sweetheart, we're going to have a great day. She clapped her hands in joy, and her laughter echoed across the room. I came to the realization that these happy and recuperative moments were what really important when I watched her play. We had moved past the hardships, the suffering, and the treachery. A fresh trip, laughter and healing awaited on the road ahead. Mary here, I'm 30 years old. I recently became a first-time mommy. I'm learning how to balance all that comes with taking care of a baby at this wonderful yet demanding period. While I was thrilled to be spending my first few days at home with my infant child, they were also very demanding. I understood that having a kid would make things different, but I had no idea how difficult it would be to take care of my son, manage the house, and physically recuperate from giving birth. At home, everything was a little disorganized. The dishes were frequently left in the sink for longer than I would have liked, and laundry was mounting. I was always rushing about trying to take care of my infant, so it was difficult for me to find time for myself. One afternoon, as I was trying to soothe my baby who was weeping, the doorbell rang. I was taken aback to see my mother-in-law, Janet, waiting at the door as I hadn't anticipated her presence. As soon as she entered our living room, I saw that she was focusing on the mess. The toys strewn all over the place, the clutter, and the dirty dishes in the kitchen. I hadn't had time to clean up, so it wasn't exactly how I wanted her to view our house. Janet gave me a glance, and I could see concern mixed with judgment in her eyes. Janet replied, "I thought I'd come by to check on you," as she walked cautiously over a baby toy that was lying on the ground. "Jerry mentioned you might need some help." I said, "Thanks, Janet," attempting to sound composed despite how overwhelmed I felt. "Things are a bit crazy right now, but we're managing." Janet appeared unconvinced. I felt even more self-conscious when she entered the kitchen and heard the sound of dirty dishes clanking against one another. She said sternly, "Looks like you could use more than just a little help. Look at this mess. Do you intend to raise my grandchild in this manner?" Her comments heard, and I experienced a wave of simultaneous emotions, including worry, grief, and resentment. Even though I was making every effort to stay up, it felt like nothing I was doing was adequate at that particular time. Attempting to pull my son closer to me, I said, "I'm doing the best I can," as though attempting to avoid her criticism. Janet grumbled, obviously unimpressed. "Mary, being a mother is about prioritizing, and right now it looks like you aren't prioritizing anything properly." Before I could finish my sentence, my husband Jerry entered the room. He saw the tension immediately and attempted to diffuse it. He came to my support and said, "Mom, Mary is doing an amazing job. It's been really tough, especially with the baby not sleeping well." Janet didn't calm down. Instead, she gave Jerry a serious glance. "You have to explain to her what's crucial in this situation. Being responsible involves more than simply keeping the house tidy. She isn't upholding the expectations of her family." Jerry appeared to be caught in the midst. Unsure of what to say, he glanced at his mother and then back at me. "Mom, let's postpone this for now. Mary is still getting better," he stated. But Janet interrupted him. She raised her voice and remarked, "That's precisely the time when discipline needs to be taught. She will benefit more in the long run if she learns how to manage things now. You can't treat her too lightly." Jerry thought for a moment before stating, "Maybe you're right, Mom," which shocked me. Perhaps Mary really must learn the hard way. It was like though my spouse had punched me in the stomach. Considering how hard I was trying, I was shocked that he would support his mother. Janet nodded emphatically, as though she'd won the debate, saying, "Show her that this kind of behavior can't be tolerated. She shoved Jerry in my direction. I was feeling so overwhelmed at the time. It wasn't only the physical tiredness or the disarray in the house. It was also the sense that those who were meant to be my supporters were passing judgment on and misinterpreting me. Even though I was trying my hardest and that motherhood was difficult enough, Janet seemed to need more. I learned that day how crucial it is to surround yourself with people who are sympathetic to the struggles faced by new mothers. It's about trying your best, even when things feel overwhelming, and surrounding yourself with people who encourage you rather than depress you. It's not only about keeping the house tidy or upholding family standards. Jerry's palm brushed my cheek before I could even blink. Loud and startling, the boom reverberated around the room. I will always remember that instance, a boundary that ought to have never been crossed. I held our baby boy close, his cries mixing with the sound of my racing heartbeat. "Jerry, what are you doing?" I managed to ask through tears. The pain from the slap was nothing compared to the pain of betrayal. I couldn't believe this was happening. "This is for your own good, Mary," Jerry said, his voice flat and empty. He didn't even look me in the eyes. "You need to learn." The room fell silent. The only sound was the soft whimpers of our son. Jerry glanced at me, his face showing a mix of frustration and embarrassment, but it didn't feel like an apology. Janet, his mother, stood there with a stern expression, not saying a word, but her presence alone was enough to make things worse. She didn't move, didn't flinch. She just stood there, watching as if she had expected this to happen. What was supposed to be a visit to help me had turned into something else entirely. Instead of support, I got judgment, and now this slap that shook my entire world. It was like everything I thought I knew about family was crumbling around me. As Janet prepared to leave, she whispered something to Jerry at the door. I couldn't hear all of it, but her smug look and Jerry's troubled face told me it wasn't anything kind. I could feel the coldness in the air, and it made my heart sink even more. That night, after the chaos of the day, I rocked my son to sleep, trying to soothe him as much as myself. But the fear and dread wouldn't leave me. What was supposed to be a loving family now felt like something else entirely. It felt like I was being judged, like I was on trial, and I was failing in their eyes. As I held my son close, I made a decision. I needed to get out, not just for my safety, but for his too. The house that once felt like a home now felt like a prison built by the very people who were supposed to love and protect us. I realized that this wasn't a place where I could raise my son safely. Jerry had crossed a line, and I couldn't trust him anymore, especially with his mother's influence always lurking in the background. That night, I couldn't bear to sleep next to Jerry. Instead, I took my baby to the nursery, a small room that had become my sanctuary in the past few weeks. As I sat in the rocking chair holding my son, the events of the day played over and over in my mind. Each time I thought about it, the pain and betrayal grew stronger. I knew that I couldn't stay. The next morning, while Jerry was at work and Janet was thankfully gone, I made a call. Maria, a close friend who had offered her help before, answered quickly. "Jess, it's me." "I need the help you offered," I said, my voice shaking with a mix of fear and determination. "Say no more, Mary. I'll come by today with my truck. We can move your things to my place until you figure out where you want to go," Maria responded, her voice calm and reassuring. We came up with a simple but risky plan. During the day, I would pack as much as I could, just the essentials for my son and me. Maria would come by in the evening, and we would quietly move everything out before Jerry came home. I knew I couldn't face him again, not after what had happened. It was dangerous to stay, and I couldn't risk him or Janet finding out what I was planning. As I packed, my heart raced, but I knew it was the right thing to do. This wasn't just about me. I had to protect my son and give him the safe, loving environment he deserved. I couldn't let him grow up in a house where violence was acceptable, where control and manipulation were the norms. Leaving was hard, but staying would have been harder. This was the beginning of a new chapter for us, one where I could finally breathe, and my son could grow up in peace. I stood there, thinking about what would happen if I faced Jerry again. He might try to apologize, or worse, Janet might convince him to continue controlling me. I couldn't let that happen. I knew I had to leave. All day as I packed my things, every baby outfit and toy felt heavy with memories. I couldn't stop thinking about the life I had imagined, the family I had wanted to build with Jerry. But the sharp memory of Jerry's slap and Janet's cold, judgmental eyes reminded me that staying wasn't an option anymore. By late afternoon, most of my things were packed into boxes. I hid everything in the garage, trying to stay calm and focused. Maria, my best friend, arrived just as the sun began to set. Her arrival felt like a glimmer of hope in what had been one of the hardest days of my life. "Are you ready?" Maria asked as she stepped inside, looking at the boxes and bags scattered around. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, holding my baby boy a little closer to my chest. I had to do this for him, for both of us. We moved quickly, loading everything into our truck. We worked silently but efficiently, as if we had done this 100 times before. The last room I packed was the nursery. It had been my little sanctuary, the only place in the house where I had felt safe and at peace. I took one last look around, saying a quiet goodbye to the life I had dreamed of having with Jerry, but I knew now that this dream was over. As we drove away, I watched the house fade in the rearview mirror. A chapter in my life was closing, and though my heart felt heavy, I also felt a flicker of hope. My baby slept peacefully in his car seat, unaware of the big change happening. But finally, I knew he was safe. This was the first night of our new life, a life where fear and manipulation no longer had control over us. When we arrived at Maria's place, I felt a wave of relief. Her home was filled with warmth and safety, a stark contrast to the oppressive feeling that had taken over my own home. Being there made me even more determined to make sure Jerry and Janet couldn't hurt us again. I realized that simply leaving wasn't enough. I needed to ensure that they couldn't twist the story in their favor or ever put someone else through what I had experienced. I started by reaching out to family and friends, pretending I just wanted to catch up. During these conversations, I carefully gathered bits of information, slyly recording any mentions of Janet's controlling behavior or Jerry's strange willingness to follow her lead. Some people were hesitant to talk, but many hadn't realized how deep Janet's manipulation ran. Over time, I began to collect text messages, voicemails, and even recorded calls that painted a clear picture of what was really happening behind closed doors. The most valuable piece of evidence came when I managed to record a video of Janet coaching Jerry on how to control me. Her words made it clear that this wasn't about concern or love. It was about power and control. Once I had gathered enough evidence, I decided it was time to confront them. I chose a family gathering hosted by Jerry's sister. It was a neutral place with plenty of family members present. Some of them had already hinted that they were uncomfortable with the way Janet dominated the family, so I hoped this would be the right time and place to reveal the truth. On the day of the gathering, I was nervous. My hands shook and my heart raced, but I knew this had to be done. I arrived with Maria by my side, her support giving me the strength to go through with it. As I walked into the room, I could feel the tension. People greeted me with quiet murmurs, but everyone seemed to know something was off. Word about Jerry and Janet's behavior had spread through the family, and even the relatives who lived far away had heard rumors. After the initial greetings, I took a deep breath and prepared myself for what was to come. It was time to show everyone who Jerry and Janet really were and to finally take control of my life again. I stood up, my hands shaking, but my voice was steady. "I have something important to say," I began as everyone in the room turned to look at me. I could feel all eyes on me, but I knew this had to be done. It's about Jerry and his mother Janet, and how their actions have affected not just me and my son, but the whole family. Jerry looked shocked, and I could see the fear in his eyes as he tried to stop me. "Mary, let's not do this here," he said, trying to interrupt. But I didn't back down. "No," I replied, pulling out my phone. "This is not just a personal issue." I connected my phone to the Bluetooth speaker, and the room fell silent. The recordings began to play. Janet's cold, controlling voice telling Jerry how to handle me, and Jerry's hesitant agreements. It was all there, plain as day, their plans to fix my behavior. The reactions in the room were immediate. Some people looked shocked, others disgusted. Jerry's aunt, who had always been kind to me, looked heartbroken. She turned to Janet, her voice shaking. "Is this true, Janet? Were you really forcing Jerry to do this?" Janet's face turned red with anger and fear. "These are taken out of context," she snapped, trying to defend herself, but it was too late. Jerry's cousin, who had been quietly observing until now, stood up. "No, they aren't out of context. We've seen signs of this for years, but we didn't want to believe it." That moment changed everything. Family members began to speak up, sharing their own experiences with Janet's controlling ways. Slowly, a picture emerged of a woman who had manipulated her family for years, hiding behind the role of a caring mother. Jerry sat there in silence, looking pale and overwhelmed, finally seeing the truth about his mother's control over his life. As the family meeting turned into a heated discussion about Janet's influence, I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders. The truth was out. It wasn't just me who saw it. Now everyone in the room knew. The family who had been under Janet's control for so long finally saw her manipulations for what they were. After the confrontation, there was a quiet, somber feeling in the air. The family, long under Janet's influence, now had to come to terms with what had been going on for years. The shock was clear on their faces, and it was uncomfortable for everyone to realize how deeply Janet had affected their lives. For me, the decision to leave Jerry was painful, but it was also necessary. After everything that had happened, there was no going back. As the family began to leave, I gathered my son, who was blissfully unaware of the storm around him. With one last look at the family home, I stepped into the unknown, knowing I was doing the right thing for us. Jerry watched us leave, his face filled with sadness and regret. His voice, once so familiar, now felt distant as he whispered a weak goodbye. I didn't look back. Janet, on the other hand, faced a much harsher reality. The family she had controlled for so long now saw her for who she really was. They began to distance themselves, realizing how much harm her actions had caused. Her attempts to regain control went unheard. The evidence from the recordings and the testimonies at the gathering had been too much for anyone to ignore. In the weeks that followed, Jerry tried to reach out to me. His messages were full of apologies, promises of change, and pleas for forgiveness. But the memory of his raised hand and his mother's influence over him was too much to forget. The trust between us had been broken, and with it, our marriage. I knew then that this was the end of one chapter and the beginning of a new one. I wasn't just leaving a bad situation. I was starting a new life, one where I could be free from control and fear and focus on raising my son in a safe, loving environment. I moved to a little apartment that was distant from the neighborhood I knew as home. There, no one was aware of my history, and I could start anew free from the burden of it all. My close friend Maria supported me during this new phase of my life. Her assistance was much appreciated as I worked to create a life that felt secure for my kid and me. My days were straightforward yet very intentional. I devoted much of my time to my son's care and to gradually reassembling my life. The mending process hurt more than I anticipated at times, and it wasn't always simple or quick. Even though I didn't always feel like I could handle everything that had happened, I was able to go on because I was free to choose without worrying about being dictated to or tricked. It seemed like an opportunity for a new beginning, to live life as I saw fit. I began attending therapy where I was taught how to get over my emotional scars. In order to feel less alone, I also attended support groups for single moms, where I was able to connect with people who had experienced similar things. The shattered bits of my former self started to reassemble over time. But I had changed. I was stronger and more resilient than I had ever been. I was now capable of defending my own interests and shielding my son from danger. My son's laughter became my compass, enabling me to get through the most trying times. I was ecstatic to watch him develop and reach new heights. Every tiny victory gave me greater hope for the future. I noticed that as he gained mobility in speech, my confidence increased as well. I was learning how to be a fearless woman, a mother, and how to create a secure and caring household. A year had elapsed before my eyes after several months of waiting. One evening, I took a seat in our comfortable living room after putting my kid to bed. It was stuffed full of his toys and drawings, mementos of the contented life we were creating together. I couldn't help but notice how much progress we had made. Though it wasn't as intense as it had been in the past, the agony of the past was still present, like a shadow. The promise of fresh starts shone brightly, and I found strength in my son's unwavering love and in the encouragement of friends like Maria. I realized that night, while sipping my tea, that I was finally ready to tell my tale. In order to write about the experiences I had experienced, I established a blog. It was not only for myself, it was also for other people who could be facing comparable difficulties. I wanted to reach out and let others who were being abused or manipulated know they weren't alone. With each blog post I published, I moved closer to being someone who could help others and further away from the victim I once was. Thinking back on my trip, I saw that I had developed into an advocate. I was speaking out against the type of manipulation and control I had previously been subjected to because I had discovered my voice. My narrative was one of tenacity, of rising above adversity and finding strength inside. Now that I've told you my tale, I want to leave you with a thought-provoking question. Do you think it's possible to completely escape the grip of a controlling family? Or do such connections' consequences always linger? Please share your opinions and experiences in the comments section. Let's continue this discussion and provide each other support. Mary, sweetheart, where are you? I made the call as soon as I got home. I could hear my child crying, even though I couldn't see her. The home was filled with a calming sound. There was a significant issue. When I eventually found her in her room, I was astounded. My kid got her whole head cut because she loved her long, beautiful hair. Honey, what happened? Who has the blame for this? My voice quivered as I could already feel my rage growing. Her next statement made my blood boil. It was Grandma. Mom, Mary's red eyes filled with tears as she sobbed. She said I looked like a troublemaker with my hair and shaved it all off by force. That was the first time I had ever felt a combination of shock, agony, and rage like that. I swore at that very moment to exact revenge. Salutations, my name is Julie. I work full-time as a 38-year-old single mother. Mary, my 15-year-old daughter, is my entire world. We live in a simple, modest house in the suburbs. It's our sanctuary, even if it's not very elegant. Fourth, between my hard nursing hours, I put forth endless effort to make sure we have a roof over our heads and food on the table. Although no one ever promised an easy life, it's not easy. Mary is a creative and intellectual whirlwind. Her lovely curls make even Rapunzel jealous, and she loves to show off her uniqueness with them. If it were just the two of us, life would be wonderful. Nevertheless, a dark cloud blocks out our peace. Lauren, my former mother-in-law, resides way too close to us. Lauren is a 72-year-old widow with a sharp tongue. She helps look after Mary after school, and for that I know I should be thankful, but the price is constant criticism. Every time she says, "Julie, dear," it pisses me off and makes my skin crawl. Don't you think Mary's hair is a bit wild? Taking a big breath, I said, "She likes it that way." Lauren, I want to yell, but I'm trying not to stress out. Sounds like a medieval queen. Girls knew how to present themselves in my day, she says. I bite my tongue again, not wanting to say what I really want to. I can't afford to lose my access to free childcare. Therefore, I want to scream out. The fact that Lauren treated Mary's father, her own son, so harshly just makes things worse. Still, he made the wrong turn. Kyle, the man I married, was raised in a strict household by his mother. Lauren, who raised him with a firm hand, believed that hard punishment would aid in his character development. He was never allowed to be himself or make his own choices. It was she who assessed everything he did. As a child, Kyle refused to do whatever his mother asked of him. He defied orders and made bad decisions that finally got him into trouble. As he is now jailed, Mary is fatherless. Lauren, of course, blames Kyle's bad luck on me and the entire world. She acts as if I ruined her child by forcing him to lead such a life. But in reality, Kyle was pushed away by Lauren's tyrannical rule. She is now attempting to hurt my child by venting her anger in the same manner that she did to Mary and me. For Lauren, Mary is a second chance to shape someone into her perfect self, and it's my responsibility to stand in her way. Lauren first begged for help with Mary. She contended that, as a grandmother, she was entitled to participate in her life and make up for lost time. Julie, I want to be engaged in my granddaughter's life, even though I realize I'm old. Almost imploringly, she would implore, "Let me help." A part of me believed her, admitting that I was in need of assistance. Having someone step in, even if it was Lauren, felt like a huge relief, especially because I was a single parent and worked hectic shifts at the hospital. I wished she were real, that maybe she might do Mary some good. I took her criticism to be only a reflection of who she was, and help is help, right? But every day I regret my decision more and more. Lauren gradually imposed her rules, expectations, and judgments on our lives. She began to feel unwelcome. Just as with Kyle, she was trying to be in charge instead of being helpful. And everyone knows what will happen. Isabella is a close friend and coworker, which is a blessing. She is my rock of support. How do you deal with that old witch? She asked me the other day over coffee, trying to lighten the tone of our conversation by adding sugar to her cup. She said, "Julie, you have the patience of a saint." Still, I laughed a tired chuckle. Isabella, I'm becoming antsy. It's really becoming gloomy. Paul, another neighbor of mine, is always eager to help out around the house. He's a real hunk, to be honest, and the way he stares at me makes me wonder if I may have gotten away with it the first time around with Mary's father. But after the nightmare that was that relationship, my new rule is to just stay out of it. "Hey, Julie, need a hand?" Paul calls from the street. Here he comes, wearing a tight shirt and flashing his easy smile. I try not to stare at his biceps as he lifts some boxes from the garage. "Thanks, Paul, you're a lifesaver, I say, but in my head, I'm thinking, and a temptation I really don't need right now. But let's focus on the real drama in my life, which isn't handsome neighbors. It's the ongoing Cold War between Lauren and me. The battleground. Mary's upbringing. Mary, sit up straight. A young lady doesn't slouch. Lauren barks in the middle of dinner, like she's training my daughter for the military. I see Mary's shoulders drop, and my heart sinks. Mom, do I have to listen to her? Mary asks quietly, tired of it all. I glance at Lauren, silently letting her know that this fight isn't over. Just do your best, darling, I say, trying to comfort Mary. We all have different ideas about what's important. My voice sharpens as I look at Lauren. Different ideas. Yes, Lauren mutters with that superior tone that makes me want to scream. If you listen to me, Julie, this girl wouldn't be running wild. I clench my fists under the table, trying not to lose it then and there. She's not running wild, Lauren. She's expressing herself, and I won't stop her from doing that. My tone is sharper than I intended, but I'm at the end of my rope. Lauren, as always, stays calm and cold. Mark my words, Julie, without discipline, that girl will end up in trouble. I watch as Mary goes to her room, her curls bouncing, curls I wouldn't be seeing for much longer. A shiver runs down my spine. I've been holding this situation together for so long, but something inside me is screaming that it's about to blow, and it's going to be ugly. After a long, extra shift at the hospital, all I wanted was to come home, hug Mary, and forget about Lauren for a while. But as soon as I walked through the door, I felt it. Something was terribly wrong. Mary, sweetheart, I'm home. I called out, but there was no answer. The silence was thick, creeping over me like a bad feeling. It was the kind of silence that only comes right before something awful happens. I ran to her room, and when I opened the door, my heart stopped. Mary was curled up on the bed, sobbing, her whole body shaking with her tears. When she finally looked up at me, I nearly collapsed. Her beautiful curls were gone, not a single strand of hair was left. Her head was shaved all the way to the scalp. Mom, Mary cried, running into my arms. Grandma did this while I was sleeping. I held her tight, trying not to fall apart right there. My love, everything's going to be okay. We'll fix this, I whispered, but inside, I was burning with anger. My mind screamed, how dare that woman do this to my daughter? Furious. I stormed into the living room like a hurricane. Lauren was sitting there, calm as ever, acting like nothing had happened, cool as a cucumber. My daughter. I yelled, my voice echoing through the house. What the hell have you done? I was trembling with rage, but Lauren didn't even flinch. I did what needed to be done, she replied, her voice calm, as if what she'd done was perfectly reasonable. That girl was becoming too vain and disobedient. Julie. I almost laughed at how absurd her words were. Vain. Disobedient. She's 15. Lauren, what on earth are you talking about? It's time she learned some discipline, Lauren said with her usual coldness, as if she were laying down some unarguable fact. In my day, girls who cared too much about their looks, who spent time in front of the mirror like Mary, ended up lost. You think it's just hair, but that's how it starts. Today it's curls, tomorrow it's makeup and fancy clothes. Before you know it, she'll be pregnant and ruined. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Pregnant? Lost? Mary is 15. I shouted, completely stunned. Lauren kept talking like she was quoting some outdated manual from 1948. My body trembled with anger, my voice shaky from the hatred I was trying to hold back. She's a child, not a grown woman. What you did isn't discipline. It's cruelty. Don't be naive, Julie, Lauren said, shaking her head in disapproval. If you keep letting her be vain, giving her all this freedom, she'll end up just like her father, lost, with no direction or morals. That was it. I snapped. Shut up, I screamed. This isn't your time, you old witch. You shaved her head against her will. That's not discipline. It's abuse. And I'm calling the police. Lauren laughed a dry, bitter laugh, like someone who thinks they're above everyone else. The sound filled the room. Oh, Julie, don't be so dramatic. You're weak. You always have been. I've tolerated your soft parenting for too long. Someone had to step in before Mary turned into a delinquent. She was heading down the same wrong path as her father, and you didn't even notice, Lauren said coldly. That was the final straw. My already fragile self-control broke. My hands were shaking, and my whole body trembled with fury. How dare she compare Mary to Frank? As if it were my fault, as if I had failed. Get out of my house now. I yelled, unable to stop the tears rolling down my face. I will never let you touch my daughter again. Lauren, as cold as ever, calmly gathered her things without showing any regret. Mark my words, Julie, you will regret not listening to me, she said, her words dripping with venom. When the door finally closed behind her, my strength collapsed. The tears came freely now. I felt like I had failed to protect my daughter. But in that moment, I made a silent promise. Lauren would never have the power to hurt us again. Suddenly, a knock on the door startled me. It was Paul, my neighbor. He had a worried look, the kind only someone who truly cares about you could have. Julie, is everything okay? I heard shouting, he asked, concern in his voice. The moment he saw my face, he knew something terrible had happened. What happened? He asked softly but urgently. I couldn't find the words. I just pointed toward Mary's room. When Paul saw her, his eyes widened in shock. Oh my God, who did this? He whispered. Lauren, I muttered, my voice shaking with hatred, each word heavy with anger. Paul's expression changed from that of a friendly neighbor to someone ready for battle. This is unacceptable. I'm calling the police right now, he declared. No, Mary cried, her voice broken, her eyes filled with fear. I don't want anyone to see me like this. She curled up in my arms and I held her tightly, trying to shield her from the pain that had pierced her heart. It's okay, my love, I whispered, trying to comfort her. We won't do anything you don't want to do. I'm here. Paul knelt beside us, his face showing both deep concern and restrained anger. Is there anything I can do? He asked, his voice kind but firm, like someone who wouldn't tolerate injustice. Before I could answer, my phone vibrated. It was Isabella, my best friend. Her voice was full of worry. Julie, what's going on? I got your message, and it sounded like you were falling apart. I tried to speak, but the words barely came out between sobs. I told her what had happened. That witch. Isabella shouted over the phone, filled with rage on my behalf. I'm coming over right now. And before I could even catch my breath, there was another knock at the door. In just a few minutes, she was inside, arms full of bags, looking like a hero ready for battle. Okay, here's the plan, she said with determination, pulling out tissues, hats, and fashion magazines. I brought ideas for pixie cuts and some inspiration for colored streaks. We're going to fix this right now. Mary, still heartbroken, managed a small smile as Isabella got to work. At that moment, I realized how lucky I was to have a friend like her. Isabella was always the one who knew how to solve things with a practical approach and a bit of humor. Relax. Aunt Isabella is here to save the day. And if that old witch comes back, we'll deal with her. With a haircut and an axe, she joked, trying to lighten the mood. As Isabella worked on Mary's hair, making the best of what was left, Paul came closer, and I started to open up. I told him everything Lauren had done, every detail, every wound she had caused, not just to Mary, but to me as well. The guilt weighed heavy in my heart. "I can't believe I let that woman get so close to my daughter," I whispered. The days that followed were a blur of tears, anger, and sleepless nights. Mary refused to leave her room, let alone go back to school. I called work, pretending I was sick. But the truth was, Mary needed me, and that was all that mattered. Our first stop was the police station, but frustration hit quickly. The officer, looking completely uninterested, said, "I'm sorry, ma'am, but since there was no physical harm, this is a civil matter." Physical harm? I snapped before I could control myself. Look at my daughter. How can you say there's no physical harm? But it seemed the law was on Lauren's side. The injustice was right there, and I just wanted to scream. Our second stop was a lawyer's office. He listened carefully to our story and then said, "We can definitely pursue a claim for emotional damages." That small glimmer of hope was something. But I knew no legal action could truly heal the damage Lauren had done to Mary. Meanwhile, Paul had also been working quietly behind the scenes. "I have a friend who specializes in family law," he said one day, his eyes filled with determination. "He's willing to take your case pro bono." In that moment, I felt like maybe we weren't fighting this battle alone after all. I could have kissed him right then, but there wasn't time for that. Things were about to get even more complicated, and I knew I would need every bit of strength I had left. "We're going to bury that witch in paperwork," Paul said firmly. And with Isabella by my side, I knew I wasn't alone in this fight. First, the whispers started in the supermarket. I noticed neighbors giving me sideways glances and hushed murmurs. Then the phone calls began, mostly from distant relatives. "Julie, is it true you've been neglecting Mary?" One cousin asked, her voice dripping with judgment. That's when I realized Lauren wasn't just trying to hurt me. She was trying to destroy me. She had started a smear campaign, spreading rumors that I was an unfit mother. I collapsed onto the sofa next to Isabella and Paul, feeling the pressure weighing me down. "That witch is trying to turn everyone against me," I said, the lump in my throat growing stronger. But Lauren had underestimated me. If she wanted a war, she was going to get one. I decided to fight back. I started digging into Lauren's past, contacting her old friends and relatives. I needed to know if there was more she was hiding. What I found left me cold. One night, as I sat with Mary, she finally opened up to me, revealing what she had been holding back for so long. If I misbehaved, Grandma said she'd send me to a boarding school, Mary said, hesitating for a moment before continuing. Tears filled her eyes as she added, "She used to lock me in the closet when I did something wrong." My blood boiled. How had I not seen this sooner? How could I have let my daughter suffer like this? I hugged Mary tightly, my heart breaking with guilt and anger. "This is not your fault, sweetheart," I assured her. "Your grandmother will never hurt you again." With the help of Isabella and Paul, we started preparing for our next move. We set up hidden cameras around the house, creating a trap in case Lauren tried to contact us again. We even trained Mary, teaching her how to collect evidence without putting herself in danger. "Remember, Mary," Paul said gently but seriously as he showed her how to use the voice recorder on her phone. "If your grandmother calls or shows up, record everything. Leave no room for mistakes." We were ready. Lauren had no idea what was coming. I had been on the defensive for too long, but now it was my turn to fight back. "Press this button as soon as necessary." "Understood," I said, looking Mary in the eyes. She nodded with a strength that both made me proud and broke my heart at the same time. "I won't let you down, Mom." "You could never let me down, my love," I replied, hugging her tightly. "We're in this together, all the way." The trap was set, and now we just had to wait for Lauren to make her next move. This time, I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to end this for good. The day of the trial finally came, and my stomach was in knots. The tension was unbearable. Mary squeezed my hand tightly as we walked into the courtroom. Her eyes were focused on the floor, but her determination gave me strength. "You can do this, Mom," she whispered. Her courage fueled me, giving me strength I didn't know I had. Our lawyer began presenting our case, and it was like a mountain of evidence was crashing down on Lauren. The footage from the hidden camera showed everything: her invading our home, her hateful words echoing in the courtroom. "You ungrateful brat. I'll teach you to never disobey me again." Her voice boomed from the recordings. The judge, who had stayed calm up until then, grew more serious with each vile word Lauren had spoken. But that was only the start. One by one, witnesses took the stand. Former family friends, Nanny, even Mary's old piano teacher. They all shared their stories. She told me if I didn't make Mary practice piano for 5 hours a day, she'd fire me, the teacher said, his voice shaking. The stories kept coming, building an airtight case against Lauren. But the most powerful moment was when Mary gave her testimony. My brave little girl stood there, her voice trembling but filled with determination. "If I told Mom what she did, she'd make sure I'd be taken away," Mary confessed, tears in her eyes. I couldn't hold back my own tears. Lauren's lawyer tried desperately to make her seem like a loving, misunderstood grandmother, but it was too late. The evidence was clear, and the court wasn't buying it. When the judge finally announced his decision, I felt like I could breathe again. "This court grants a permanent restraining order against the defendant," the judge said firmly. "Additionally, significant damages are awarded to cover therapy and emotional distress caused to the plaintiff." Lauren was officially out of our lives forever. As we left the courtroom, feeling lighter than I had in months, Lauren made one last pathetic attempt. She came toward us, tears streaming down her face, hoping for some kind of forgiveness. "Julie, Mary, I'm sorry," she began, her voice trembling. But I cut her off, my voice cold and firm. "Save your apologies, Lauren. You're dead to us." I turned away without looking back, and we walked away. In that moment, a huge weight lifted off my shoulders. We were free. The months that followed were hard, but we got through them together. Mary started therapy, and little by little, I saw my daughter come back to life. The sparkle in her eyes returned, and so did her strength. She was coming out of the shell she had been hiding in. One night at the dinner table with me, Isabella, Paul, and Mary, she made a surprising announcement. "I want to donate the settlement money," Mary said firmly. "I want to help other kids who've been through what I did." I smiled, proud of her strength. But as her words echoed in my mind, a plan started to form. Mary was healing, but I still carried the anger. Lauren had tried to destroy my daughter and ruin me, and I couldn't just let her get away with it. She needed to feel what we had felt. Lauren probably thought that because of the restraining order and distance limit, everything had been settled, and she could now live in peace. She was unaware that the real challenge had only begun. I began by feigning composure by avoiding conversation and confrontation. I made it seem to Lauren that we were out of her life and that the struggle was over. But behind the scenes, I was preparing for something greater. I used my insider knowledge of her prior indiscretions and secrets to my advantage. The woman who took pleasure in berating others had a past replete with small flaws, unpaid debts, fights, and a financial scandal involving her late husband's assets. If anyone found out, that would destroy her reputation. Paul and Isabella assisted me in starting to remove those enigma layers. When one of Lauren's neighbors received an anonymous letter about the financial scandal, Lauren was first shocked. Not too long afterward, the condo's management office got a letter that was nearly exact to this one. Just hints and thoughts, nothing major, but enough to cast doubt on things and make her uncomfortable. Next, I got in touch with Lauren's former friend, whom she had tricked years before. By arranging an unplanned encounter, I urged the friend to divulge experiences that Lauren would want to keep private. It ended an already precarious relationship. Lauren's standing started to decline. But the final blow was the cruelest. Lauren depended on inspiring admiration and respect in everyone around her. With the walls closing in and her reputation ruined, she began to pull away. First, though, I informed them that she was having financial difficulties since her own late spouse had left her bankrupt. The incident made her a laughing figure in the social circles she was so active in. Eventually, Lauren found herself on her own, without the friends, reputation, or regard she had always taken for granted from everyone around her. She was wounded more than anything by her growing insignificance. After word spread of her death, Lauren tried to contact me, maybe seeking support. However, it was already the empathetic me from before. Mary was no longer vulnerable to protect. I was left to watch from a distance. She had tried to destroy my life, but in the end, she had destroyed her own. Thank you for listening to this story. I would be really interested in hearing your thoughts, so please leave a comment below with them. To view the upcoming stories, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I'm a 35-year-old financial advisor by the name of Grace. It was then that I met Jonathan, the man who would later leave me for another woman. I remember our first encounter quite clearly. With an expression of anxiety and a large stack of paperwork, he came into my office. He raised a hand in greeting. Grace, right. My name is Jonathan. I've heard you're the financial problem solver. I said, grinning, that's what they say. See if we can unravel yours by taking a peek. Jonathan was a tall man whose short brown hair complemented his warm, friendly eyes that never stopped smiling, even when his lips were sealed in a smile. Our chat drifted from the dull realm of numbers and taxes to our favorite movies, our favorite songs, and even heated arguments about whose pizza in town was the finest as we dug into his papers. With Jonathan's easygoing attitude, the time flew by. He quickly said, I never imagined sorting out my finances could be this fun. He chuckled when I jokingly referenced my magic touch and said, how about a coffee to thank you for making this experience far less dreadful than anticipated? Soon after, their coffee dates turned into dinners and weekend getaways. Jonathan proposed after 7 months, and I immediately said yes. Even though it seemed like a flashbulb romance, it was ideal for us. Our nuptials were simple yet charming. I experienced a deep sensation of having discovered my lifetime companion when we exchanged vows. Mary, Jonathan's mother, was also present. She spoke softly, talking about how excited she was about having grandkids. Married life was blissful at first. Jonathan remained working at his real estate company while I stayed at my firm. We had nice walks, movie evenings, and hearty dinners. However, the calm started to wane as the topic of children came up more often, especially when Mary encouraged it. Her informal remarks quickly evolved into an unrelenting plea for grandkids. It became regular to get phone calls asking how I was doing with my pregnancy and comments made during visits regarding how a kid would complete the family. Mom, give us some time. Jonathan attempted to joke away the strain, but it just grew more. I tried to be empathetic at first, trying to appreciate her enthusiasm about being a grandma. Still, her constant meddling started to wear thin. I confided in Jonathan one evening, saying, "Your mom needs to give us some space. She seems to play a larger role in our marriage than we do." Jonathan seemed uncomfortable, but he waved my worries away, saying it was only her excitement. Mary's grip on our life grew stronger and went beyond her obsession with her grandkids. She had views on everything, including our eating habits and money management. Jonathan's phone rang one Saturday morning when he and I were having breakfast. It was Mary, and Jonathan placed her on speaker as usual. "Jonathan, how are you both doing with your food?" "Recall that conception depends on a nutritious diet," she stated sternly. While I forced a tight grin, overwhelmed by her constant presence in our life, Jonathan laughed and comforted her. She seemed to be observing everything we did. Any issue was becoming worse, adding levels of stress to our marriage that I had not expected. As Mary's visits increased in frequency, one evening she showed up without warning, carrying a bundle of parenting literature. "Grace, you ought to get into these." She hefted the books onto the coffee table and said, "It's never too early to prepare." I glanced at Jonathan, expecting him to step in, but all he did was shrug. "Many thanks, Mary. We'll have a look," I said, trying to seem somewhat appreciative. Her visits eventually became routine, as though she was closely monitoring us to make sure we were ready for parenting. Whenever she brought up the topic of babies, Jonathan would only nod in agreement. I finally snapped one night after yet another of Mary's intrusive visits. "We need to discuss, Jonathan," I remarked in a frustrated tone of voice. With his eyes fixed on the TV, he inquired, "What's up?" "It's your mother. We're getting too much of her baby talk." "Without her meddling, we can scarcely enjoy our time together," I said. At last, Jonathan looked up at me. "Grace, she's simply excited. She has good intentions." "Excited or obsessed?" I shot back. "It feels like she's the third wheel in our marriage." Jonathan let out a sigh. "She's my mother. What action do you want me to take? Tell her not to give a damn." "Jonathan, it's not about compassion. It's about honoring our boundaries and choices. Are you blind to that?" We came to an end of our talk when Jonathan did not say anything, turning back to the TV. In fact, things became worse. Mary's visits increased in frequency, and her advice started to encroach more and more. "The two of you ought to go on a trip." One day, she said, "Just relax, it will help with conception." There was another occasion when she casually said, maybe Grace should quit her job to reduce stress. It seemed like she was controlling our life and Jonathan was just going along with it. My own marriage started to feel like an alien place to me. The warmth and compassion that had previously united Jonathan and me were beginning to fade, eclipsed by Mary's imposing presence. The relentless pressure about having a baby was straining us both, leading to more arguments and a noticeable evaporation of the romance that once filled our home. Yet I clung to the hope that things would improve, that somehow we would find our way back to each other. But then everything changed. One evening, Jonathan came home unusually late, his demeanor more somber than I had ever seen. I was in the kitchen, hurriedly preparing dinner when I noticed his state. "Jonathan, is everything okay?" I asked, concerned. He collapsed into a kitchen chair, burying his face in his hands. "We need to talk, Grace," he said, his voice heavy with gravity. A chill ran down my spine as I sat opposite him, my heart pounding with apprehension. "It's about us trying to have a baby," he began, not meeting my eyes. "Remember those tests we went for?" He finally looked up, his eyes meeting mine, filled with an emotion I couldn't immediately place. "A few weeks ago, Jonathan and I decided to undergo a fertility checkup. hoping it might ease Mary's relentless pressure. When Jonathan came home that evening, his expression was somber, and I knew the results were in. "It's not you, Grace. It's me," he said, taking a deep breath. He explained that the doctor had diagnosed him with a low sperm count, making it unlikely for him to father a child. The news hit us hard, a mix of relief, sadness, and confusion swirling within me. "What do you mean?" I asked, reaching out to squeeze his hand, seeking to provide some solace. Jonathan's voice broke as he replied, "I can't father a child, Grace." He withdrew his hand, a gesture that felt like a wall going up between us. "I won't go through treatment. It's not something I'm prepared to face." I was stunned by his refusal. "But why? If there's even a slight chance, shouldn't we try?" I asked, my voice thick with emotion. "It's my decision, Grace. I just can't," he replied firmly, his finality piercing the air. I couldn't wrap my head around his resistance. The Jonathan I knew was always resilient, willing to face challenges head-on. "Please don't let this drive a wedge between us. We can face this together," I pleaded. He stood, avoiding my gaze. "I need some time alone to think," he said. And with those words, he left the kitchen, leaving me in a whirlwind of unanswered questions and rising fears. His outright refusal to consider any options was baffling. Was his pride really standing in the way of our future together? The following days were tense. Jonathan barely spoke, and when he did, his words were clipped and cold. The growing distance felt like a chasm in the foundation of our marriage, widening with each silent meal and unshared night. Then one evening, the fragile state of our union cracked open irreversibly. Jonathan returned home late again. I lay in bed, feigning sleep, when I heard him on the phone. "Yes, Mom, I got the results." "No, I don't want treatment." "I'll figure something out," he whispered into the phone, a conversation he hadn't had with me. It felt like a betrayal, not just of our intimacy, but of our vows. Mary's influence was more invasive than I had ever realized, and as I lay there, tears streamed down my face, marking the silence of our room. Our home had become a shell of the warm, loving environment it once was. We were like two strangers merely sharing the same space, the remnants of our love lost in the shadow of his mother's overbearing influence. Just when I thought our situation couldn't get any more strange, life threw me an unexpected curveball. I had been feeling unwell, attributing it to stress at first, but then I missed my period. Despite the recent news about Jonathan's condition, a part of me dared to hope. I bought a pregnancy test, and sitting in the bathroom waiting for the result was agonizing. Then the indicator showed positive. I was pregnant. For a moment, I was in disbelief. After all the discussions about infertility, this seemed like a miraculous glimmer of hope amidst the ruins of our marriage. That evening, as Jonathan walked in, his usual late self barely acknowledging my presence, I knew I had to tell him. Taking a deep breath, I approached him. "Jonathan, we need to talk," I said, my voice trembling with the weight of our future. He looked up, weary. "What is it now, Grace?" "I'm pregnant," I blurted out, the words hanging between us in a heavy silence. Then he let out a bitter, cynical laugh. "Pregnant? How? The doctor said I can't." "I don't know, but the test is positive." "We're going to have a baby," I said, tears starting to well up in my eyes. He stood up suddenly, anger flashing in his eyes. "This is some kind of joke, right? You're trying to trap me." I was shocked. "Trap you?" "Jonathan, I'm telling you, we're going to have a baby." "Our baby." He paced the room, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "No, this can't be. You must have cheated." "That's it, isn't it? You cheated on me." I felt as though I had been physically struck. "Cheated? How can you even say that?" I've been nothing but faithful to you." He wasn't listening, consumed by his rage and disbelief. He shouted, "Get out. I want you out of this house." "Jonathan, please, let's talk about this. We can go to the doctor and get a confirmation," I pleaded, but it was like talking to a wall. He stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. That night, I slept in the guest room, my mind swirling with emotions. The next day, Jonathan was gone before I woke up. His mother, Mary, showed up instead. The look on her face was a mix of anger and disgust. "You should be ashamed of yourself, Grace, trapping my son with another man's child," she spat. "I didn't cheat on Jonathan. This child is his." I defended myself firmly. She laughed coldly. "Do you take me for a fool? My son can't have children. You're just a gold digger trying to secure your future." I was stunned by her cruelty. This is Jonathan's child. I've never been with anyone else. She moved closer, her voice venomous. "You have 2 weeks to pack your things and leave. And don't even think about asking for alimony or child support. You won't get a dime from us." Mary's ultimatum was the last straw. I knew I couldn't continue living in a house filled with resentment and false accusations. It was time to take control of my life, for my sake and for the baby's. First things first, I filed for divorce. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was necessary. Jonathan and his mother tried to make it difficult. They wanted a piece of everything I had, claiming it was their right. But I had a strong case. Everything I owned, all my savings and property, were mine long before Jonathan entered my life. Their attempts to grab what wasn't theirs failed miserably. As for alimony, I didn't ask for a penny. I wanted no financial ties to Jonathan, no reason for him or his mother to interfere in my life again. I was determined to start anew, free from their toxicity. I found a modest apartment, not too fancy, but cozy enough to be a fresh start. Packing up my things from the house was bittersweet. Every photo and every piece of furniture had a memory attached to it, but I was ready to leave them behind. The day I moved out, Jonathan was conspicuously absent. Maybe he couldn't face me, or perhaps he just didn't care. Either way, it didn't matter. I left the keys on the counter and closed that chapter of my life. The first few nights in my new apartment were the hardest. The silence was overwhelming, and the reality of my situation often brought me to tears. But I found comfort in the little life growing within me. Every night I talked to my unborn child, filling my small apartment with whispers of hope and love. Gradually, what had felt like a sanctuary started to feel like a true home. My daily routines brought comfort, and my connection with my unborn child strengthened with each passing day. One afternoon, as I sorted through some old boxes, I stumbled upon a photograph of Jonathan and me in better times. A pang of sadness briefly washed over me, but it quickly gave way to relief. That chapter of my life was firmly behind me. Just then, my phone rang. It was Jonathan. "Grace, I've received the divorce papers," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "I'm glad they reached you." "Please handle the formalities," I replied, striving for calm. There was a pause before he added, "I won't bother you about the baby. You won't hear from me again." It was a cold farewell, but it brought closure. Hanging up, I realized that in my solitude, I had discovered a resilience I hadn't known I possessed. I was ready to face the future, not as Jonathan's estranged wife, but as a strong, independent woman and a devoted mother. On a quiet evening, as I sat reading a magazine, my 5-year-old son, Arthur, played with his toys on the floor. Our peace was interrupted by a knock at the door. Puzzled, I answered, finding a woman on my doorstep whose eyes reflected a familiar sorrow. "Hi, Grace. It's been a long time," she said hesitantly. It took me a moment, but then I recognized her as Pamela, a friend from my past life with Jonathan. Pamela, yes, it has been. What brings you here? I asked. She looked uncomfortable, glancing at Arthur, who was now peeking curiously from behind my legs. I thought you should know about Jonathan, she said, her voice soft. Just hearing his name after all these years sent a shiver through me. What about him? I asked, maintaining a steady tone. Pamela sighed. He's not doing well, Grace. After you left, things went downhill for him. He became an alcoholic, remarried a few years ago, and had another child. But the boy was born with disabilities, and Jonathan couldn't handle it. He left them, divorced his wife, and now he's refusing to pay child support. He's in legal trouble. The news struck me, but not in the way Pamela might have expected. I felt a profound sadness, not for Jonathan, but for his child and the woman he had left behind. That's terrible, I said softly. Pamela nodded. I thought you should know, given your past with him. I appreciated her concern, but knew I had to maintain boundaries. Thank you for telling me, Pamela, but that part of my life is over. Jonathan made his choices, and they have nothing to do with me or my son. Pamela looked at Arthur, then back at me. I understand, Grace. I just thought. I offered a small, sad smile. I appreciate it, Pamela, but my focus is on Arthur and our life now. What Jonathan does or doesn't do isn't my concern anymore. She nodded, seemingly understanding. I hope you and Arthur are happy, Grace. You both deserve it. Thank you. We are, I assured her, glancing at Arthur, now fully absorbed in his toys again. After Pamela left, I closed the door and leaned against it, taking a moment to breathe deeply. The past has a way of sneaking up on you, but I was determined to keep it at bay, ensuring our future remained bright and unaffected by the shadows of days gone by. But I was resolute in my determination not to let the shadows of the past darken the vibrant life I had carefully built for myself and my son. The park was alive that day, buzzing with the laughter of children and the distant barks of dogs at play. I watched Arthur, my heart swelling with pride, as he dashed around energetically, his laughter mingling with the ambient sounds of joy. Suddenly, a familiar voice cut through the air, chilling my warm feelings. Grace, is that you? My heart sank as I turned around. It was Mary, my former mother-in-law, striding towards us with a fixated gaze on Arthur. Mary, I greeted her coolly. What are you doing here? She ignored the frost in my voice, her eyes never straying from Arthur. He's grown so much. He's your son, right? Yes, this is Arthur, I replied, subtly stepping between her and my son. Her eyes sparkled with an unsettling eagerness. I was hoping to see him. After all, he's my grandson. A wave of irritation washed over me. And why would you want to see him? Well, you know my other grandson, she began, her voice trailing off as her expression darkened. He's not well. He's sick. It's just not the same. I want to be part of a healthy grandchild's life. Her words struck me harshly, a verbal slap. The disdain in her voice for her grandchild was shocking. Mary, I said, my voice steel hard, you have no right to be part of Arthur's life. Not after everything that happened. But Grace, that was all Jonathan's doing, she protested weakly. I shook my head dismissively. You supported him. You turned against me when I was carrying your grandchild, and now you speak with such contempt about your other grandson just because he's sick. That's unforgivable. Mary's face hardened. You can't keep me away from my grandson. I can and I will, I declared firmly. Arthur doesn't need someone in his life who values people based on their health. He will not be part of your twisted view of family. She looked like she wanted to argue further, but I cut her off. This conversation is over. Stay away from us, Mary. Your presence is neither wanted nor welcomed. Taking Arthur's hand, I walked away, leaving Mary standing alone, her face a mix of anger and disbelief. As we walked, Arthur looked up at me, his innocent eyes brimming with questions. "Mommy, who was that lady?" "That was someone we used to know, sweetheart," I replied gently. "But she's not part of our lives anymore." Later, sitting on the porch and watching the sunset paint the sky with warm colors, I felt a profound sense of peace inside. Arthur's laughter echoed as he played, signaling that life had settled into a calm rhythm, the storms of the past now distant memories. "Mom, look what I made." Arthur's voice pulled me from my reverie as he rushed out holding a drawing in his hands. A picture of the two of us smiling under a big bright sun. "It's beautiful, Arthur," I said, pulling him into a hug. "You're quite the artist." He beamed with pride. "I want to put it on the fridge." "Let's do that," I smiled, following him inside. As we walked, I reflected on how far we'd come. There was a time when the weight of the past once seemed crushing, but now it felt more like a distant echo. Later that evening, after Arthur had drifted off to sleep, I sat quietly with a cup of tea, reflecting on the day's events. The phone's ring broke the silence, and I hesitated before answering. "Hello." "Hi, Grace. Kayla is here." All I wanted to do was check in. "How's it going for you and Arthur?" "Kayla, we're doing well." With a smile on my face, I answered, "Arthur's growing up so fast." "I was made aware of your encounter with Mary. Are you all right?" There was warmth and care in her voice. I exhaled. Yes, it caught me off guard, but it's all right. It is only an additional memento of the past. You've come a long way, but I know it's difficult. Grace, you've created an amazing life for yourself and Arthur, and you're strong, she remarked in a supportive manner. Many thanks, Kayla. It has great significance. Her comments were like a warm blanket wrapped around me. We chatted for a while longer about ordinary things, brief but consoling bits of life. This relationship with my sister served as a crucial reminder of my support network, especially on the days when everything seemed overwhelming. I hung up and went to the living room, where Arthur's drawing sat on the fridge, looking pleased. Upon closer inspection, I saw how much we had both matured. Healing and fresh starts had taken precedence over the hurt and rage of the past. I crept over to Arthur's chamber and watched him go off to sleep. I leaned down and gave him a gentle forehead kiss. I said, "Good night, my little artist." I stood back on the porch and watched the stars come up in the night sky. It was true that the memories of the past were fading and losing their grip on me. Hope, a quiet strength, and the unwavering love of a mother for her kid replaced them. This new chapter was about more than simply moving on. It was about thriving in the warmth of fresh starts and the solace of strong family ties.